Cory Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. I'm joined by Coach Don Patterson for a special edition of Iowa Live here at Iowa, the voice of college football. And we are taking your calls, taking your chats this evening during a bye week for the Hawkeyes, a week where Iowa really needs to regroup after what was a poor performance. We're not going to spend much time rehashing what we saw a week ago, Don. First of all, let's get an update on you, Don. I know that yesterday you had some color work for ESPN and for the FCS. How did your trip go? And you made it back home despite the monsoon today.
Drove through a lot of rain today, that's for sure. It was a good game. It was an enjoyable trip. We went to Brookings, South Dakota. That's the home of South Dakota State. Northern Iowa traveled up to South Dakota State and promptly beat them on their own new field. They have a new stadium and a good home field advantage, and yet the Panthers still took them to the woodshed and beat them.
Well, Don does a tremendous job. I was just telling him before we went live that if you haven't heard Don do color work, he's a man of many talents, and I have full confidence that he did a tremendous job yesterday. And now you can kind of turn your attention to the analytics behind this Iowa-Wisconsin game next week, which is going to be massive for both teams, especially I think Iowa, and we'll talk about that. But first of all, I think, Don, you and I both want to discuss the weekend that was in college football, and especially how it relates to Iowa. I know you just got done watching Wisconsin versus Purdue, Don.
Right.
What did you see in that game? What were your initial reactions? And then maybe I can go through some of my takeaways from that performance specifically for Wisconsin.
Yeah, I've only seen the 60-minute condensed version on Big Ten Network, and I read about the game first online. And when I saw the stats, I incorrectly assumed that Wisconsin had just run roughshod over Purdue. I couldn't help but notice the turnover differential. Purdue turned it over 5 times, Wisconsin only twice. I do recall that one of those turnovers gave Wisconsin a 1-yard touchdown drive. Another one of those interceptions negated. Purdue was fairly deep into Wisconsin territory, maybe on the plus 30 or so when they threw a pick. That was a costly turnover. Any turnover, of course, is costly. But the bottom line, if you're -3 on turnovers, you're probably going to lose.
And Don, one thing that was striking about yesterday was the lack of, really anything that we saw offensively for Purdue against Iowa. David Bell was basically shut out of this game. The Wisconsin defense held O'Connell in check. And so that's my immediate takeaway. And I guess my question for you, Don, how is it that David Bell can rack up 240 yards against Iowa a week ago? He comes back with 33 yards against Wisconsin. And yet we are sitting here probably would both agree that Iowa, their secondary is probably better than Wisconsin's, although Wisconsin's defensive line I think is a lot better. We can get to that. But how did that happen?
Well, I think one reason Bell didn't get the ball, at least get it down the field at all. It takes time, of course, for a receiver to get down the field. And I think Wisconsin's pass rush had something to do with Purdue not really making many attempts down the field. Beyond that, they did double Bell quite a bit. When I say double, what I would refer to as half coverage. A cornerback rolled up defending the flat, maybe lined up only at 2 or 3 yards off of the receiver, and then a half player, a free safety typically, because Bell's typically on the short side of the field, a free safety in position to defend over the top. So Bell had to deal with the hard corner a lot of the time, a rolled corner as we call him. And even if he could clear the corner in good shape, there's still a safety sitting in behind. At other times when there was a soft corner, they had a flat defender that was very, very well aware of where Bell was located, basically in great position to defend any kind of slant route that might be thrown his way. And he was very, very much aware that Bell is a threat because my corner's in off coverage and I have to help him with all kinds of short passes. So that was the basic game plan. It worked well. I do recall that Bell's first pass reception was less than 2 minutes left in the half. And the half was a very evenly played game. It was 13-13 at the half. And Purdue was inspired. They had an excellent crowd, probably the biggest crowd they've had in recent years, coming off of a win over a number 3 ranked Iowa. And so the fans were into it. Incidentally, Wisconsin had any number of false starts in the game too. I think tied in large part into crowd noise. But the difference maker was that Wisconsin just kept hammering away. They've got two really good backs. One ran for 149. The other one, I believe, ran for 140. Malusi's a good back. And they got a freshman phenom. He's not even 18 years old yet. But you would think he was getting ready to graduate from college the way he runs the football. So he had they had a couple of chunk plays in the running game, a 70-yard run by the freshman, and then a 35-yard run that was a highlight reel run because he should have been tackled in the backfield, and somehow he spun out of the tackle of a defensive back and then ran for 35, as I recall, for the touch. So the running game made all the difference. They only threw 8 passes. They didn't attempt too many more. So they didn't ask Mertz to do much at all, but their defense, a couple of outstanding linebackers. Chanel, I believe it is. Chanel is outstanding, number 5, especially effective when he's rushing. They'll bring him quite a bit in terms of stunts, and he had 3.5 sacks versus Purdue. And then beyond that, there's another linebacker you're familiar with by the name of Sanborn that's an outstanding player too. So the typical stingy Wisconsin defense, complemented by a time-consuming ball control Wisconsin running game that they really have gone back to, especially the last 2 games. They ran for a lot of yardage against Illinois, a lot of yardage now, I think 250 or so against Purdue. And that's the way they know how to play best. That's the formula for success they've had in the past, and I think they're back to doing that and not relying so much on a quarterback and a bunch of receivers.
Don, I know, again, you kind of walked us through what Wisconsin did differently to Iowa, but again, trying to put this into perspective, and I know it's not apples to apples. There's a lot involved here, but the average fan, Don, is going to look at this and say, well, Iowa's defense just isn't as good as we thought it was when you give up that many yards and that many receptions, and then Wisconsin the very next week holds them completely in check. So does it just come down to Iowa didn't make enough in-game adjustments, specifically doubling David Bell? I mean, what would you have done differently in hindsight now that you've had over a week to process? I don't want you to micromanage what Phil's doing. I get your position on that, but what would you have done differently to defend David?
I would have doubled David Bell a lot. I would have played a lot of half coverage his way. I even talked about playing 3 cloud to Bell, wherever Bell was, if he was an outside receiver. That would actually put a safety actually playing outside third in behind the flat defender. That's an even more extreme adjustment than half coverage would be, an outside third safety on top of a corner that's rolled up. Let's not forget, too, I believe, how many turnovers did we generate a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, rather? No, it was only a week ago, wasn't it? Did we generate any against Purdue? I can't.
One, it was the touchback.
That's right. The touchback was it. And we turned it over 4 times, as I recall. So we were -3. And again, if you're -3, you're in trouble, regardless of who you're playing. So I would have certainly doubled Bell a lot more than we did. We didn't double him really at all. He was much too much in single coverage. And then beyond that, just try to understand what Purdue's doing with those second and third quarterbacks. You remember those guys really were in the game just to run the ball. Maybe we were more than aware of that, but they still bothered us enough. I don't know how many yards they ran for. There wasn't that much yardage, but it seemed like it was significant when it happened. A good example, a lot of red zone running game came from the quarterbacks. Down there, of course, you're thinking you're in 4-down territory, so a 4-yard run's a good play. So they had a few of those that were significant. And we just didn't do a good job of getting to the quarterback. The quarterback was too comfortable for the day, and that gave him a chance, of course, to put up some really big numbers. Wisconsin did a better job of pressuring the quarterback.
Blake asks if we're taking calls. Yes, we are. Phone number at the bottom of the screen, 860-499-3332. And you don't have to limit your questions in the chat or over the phone to simply this game or the Iowa-Wisconsin game. We're here to talk about it all, obviously relating to Iowa moving forward. I do want to get to this question from Ed. I know Ed's not an Iowa fan, if I don't recall, and if he is, I apologize, Ed. He says, can anybody outside of Ohio beat Minnesota? And, of course, he's referring to the Buckeyes and the Falcons of Bowling Green, right? They're the Falcons, Don. Am I right?
I think that's right, yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on this? Is right now, you'd have to say it, and I'm not saying Purdue's out of it, but man, with what we saw yesterday, now you'd have to say it's probably a 3-team race, although we know things can change in a week's notice. But Minnesota, Wisconsin look really good right now. Like, they're coming into form. Of course, Iowa hopes they're there as well. But what do you think of Minnesota over Maryland?
Well, maybe Bowling Green got their game plan from Columbus. Maybe I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
I do think Purdue's problem, of course, they have to play both Ohio State and Columbus and Michigan State. So they have the tougher crossover schedule remaining. That'll be a problem, I would imagine. Certainly playing in Columbus will be a problem for anyone. And in that regard, you've got 3-1 Minnesota, 3-1 Iowa, 2-2 Wisconsin, 2-2 Purdue also, and everybody else has 3 or 4 losses. So you'd have to say that those 4 teams I've already mentioned that have either 1 loss or 2 losses are the most likely to be representing the West. So in that regard, this is a huge game this weekend because either we're going to pick up our 2nd loss or Wisconsin's going to earn their 3rd loss. And a 3rd loss, of course, would pretty much doom you to failure, I think. So it is critical that we find a way to beat the Badgers. The nice thing about it, since the Badgers took care of Purdue, it means we literally do have our fate in our own hands. If we went out, then we're in Indianapolis. It's that simple. And it sounds simple enough, but of course it's not going to be easy to beat any of these next 5 opponents. Some of them on paper maybe look easy. Northwestern doesn't look very formidable at this point. And until yesterday, Illinois didn't look very formidable. But Illinois ran the ball well against Penn State, better than we did. And certainly that game there'll be a lot riding on that game if we can certainly keep dodging bullets in the loss column. So I think you have to realize that all 5 of these next games are potential stumbling blocks, and you have to approach it that way. Just have the mindset of a hurdler. You got to get over 5 hurdles. And the only way to do that is to focus on the next hurdle one at a time.
Absolutely. And I know this is not a coaching mindset, Don. This is a fan's perspective. But when I look at this game coming up on Saturday, and this should not be a surprise to anybody, we called the Penn State game the biggest home game for an Iowa fan since potentially 1985. To me, this is the biggest game of the season. And obviously you can say, well, it's the biggest game of the season right now because it's the next game on the schedule. I know that's the coach's response to that, Don. But
Right.
So much is riding on this, not only because Wisconsin, you brought it out, Wisconsin, you could also argue is very much in this race right now. You look at the fact that Iowa's coming off a devastating, I don't know if that's hyperbole, but a devastating loss to Purdue after beating Penn State. And then again, you look forward, and this is probably the toughest game left, Don. I'm not saying Minnesota's not going to be tough, but to win at Madison, Iowa has proven that that's a tall task, regardless of what type of team Wisconsin has. So I do believe it's the biggest game of the season. If they lose this game, I'd have to think that not only are they out of the playoff race completely, Don, but man, that doesn't take you out of the West race, but I think it's going to be very difficult to recover from.
You're saying if Wisconsin loses?
If Iowa loses if Iowa loses Wisconsin.
I don't even want to think about the tiebreaker possibilities. It is entirely possible that the West representative will have 2 conference losses. That's entirely possible. I hope not, because maybe the tiebreaker won't go our way. I'm not sure. It's probably too early to even worry about all the possibilities as far as a bunch of teams tying with 2 losses. So let's just focus on the possibility that we can finish with 1 loss. And of course, in the process of remaining at 1 loss, it would mean that we would give Wisconsin their 3rd loss. And I think that would effectively eliminate them. They could still play a huge spoiler role, but I don't think the Western representative is going to end up Indianapolis with a 3-loss season. Maybe so. Anything's possible. Maybe it'd be a 4-way tie with 3 losses. Wouldn't that be a mess? So Let's just focus on finding a way to beat the Badgers. That'll be difficult to do. I am. We joked about it before, Cory, but I am pleased that it's an 11 o'clock kick because I know students well enough to know some of those students are going to miss the first quarter because they'd rather tailgate than be in their seats. And I do think it's very important against a team like Wisconsin that you start off and be in good shape. You don't want to play from behind against the Badgers because they're too good in their ability to shorten the game. That's a concern. So we need to get off to a good start. Be sure it's a one-score game, really ideally all the way through, unless we're playing from in front, of course, and then I don't mind it being a 2- and 3-score game.
Underway Shift Colors says if our O-line is not shored up, it's going to be a long Saturday. Don, that's been the overwhelming theme from Iowa fans over the past week. Concern about Spencer, no question, at quarterback, because obviously through 4 picks, didn't look comfortable much of the day. But a big part of that was the offensive line was not protecting Spencer. We're starting to see the youth really rear. We can always kind of ignore weaknesses when your team is winning, Don. But as soon as you get a loss, man, all those weaknesses become bigger than life. And we're starting to see that with Nick DeYoung on the outside and even Mason Richmond at left tackle. How do they resolve this? I know that you can't get bigger, faster, stronger during the season.
Well, one bright thing I could mention to you, the off week doesn't give you much opportunity to get bigger, faster, stronger. But here's the good news. And you just need to realize, Cory, in a normal game week, we only have about 165 hours to get ready for the next game. A lot of your time, it depends on how complicated the opponent's defensive schemes are. But in general, and some teams more so than others, you have to spend a certain amount of your practice time just being sure about assignments. Being sure that all 5 linemen know exactly who to block and exactly the combination of blockers that need to be able to account for different people in the defensive front. So that requires some of your time. So that's the beauty of the off week. The one thing I can guarantee you is last week, when they did practice, there was more time spent on fundamentals. So one thing I do think that happened a week ago, those young players that don't yet have fully ingrained fundamentals, those fundamentals had a chance to improve last week because that I'm sure was the emphasis last week, more so than assignments. And so with a little bit of luck, we'll see a definite improvement in terms of pass protection technique. And for that matter, maybe we'll be more effective in knocking people off the ball in the run game. So I'm sure they spent time concentrating on lower pad level in terms of run blocking and better pass protection technique as far as being able to give our quarterback the kind of time that he needs to make throws.
I do want to remind everybody, our caller lines are open, 860-499-3332. Don, again, I don't have the stats in front of me because we're kind of rolling off the cuff here early, but I don't think Iowa ran the ball all that badly in the first half against Purdue. Now, they have this issue with gaining 8 yards and then losing 2 yards. It seems like over and over again that practice. Is that zone related? Is it feast or famine, this scheme that Iowa runs? I mean, you're a former offensive coordinator. Why does Iowa have this issue?
Well, it doesn't have to be that way, I think. I think if you want to, if Tyler wants to try to assume more responsibility for what's happening in the run game, you could argue that Tyler, if things don't look very, very clean at the point of attack, go ahead instead of buying time in the backfield and hoping to find a better opportunity a second or so later. That's where you end up with the -2 and the -1 or no game. Go ahead and just try to bore a hole into the defense that's in front of you and get what you can. Have your pads low and try to have on think of it this way, just adopt an attitude that you're at that moment you became a power runner. Your pads are down. You're going to get all you can. You're not going to worry about turning it into a 10-yard game, but just worried about straining for the extra yard so that instead of picking up 1, you're able to pick up 2 or 3. That sort of mindset maybe would help a little bit, I guess. Like to believe we just are cleaner with our blocking at the point of attack, and we have a bigger crease, a better crease in our running lanes. But the bottom line is that the guys up front need to make a a commitment to keep their pads down and to drive their legs and to do a better job of getting a surge on that. That's where it all starts, is being able to knock them off the ball to the point that you can get 4 yards, not every time, but almost every time. And that's not going to be easy to do against a really stout Wisconsin defense, but we've got to do a better job. I think we have to share that responsibility. The O-line has to do their part, and the backs have to do a good job of making them look good. And that's just all about finding ways to make that first tackler miss or run through that first tackler and at least require the next guy to get you on the ground rather than the first one.
Blake Jameson says, seemed like all of Purdue's passes were to the outside quarters of the field, avoiding defensive line, hands, and linebackers. I don't know if there's anything to that, Don. Maybe you noticed the same, but to me,
there were some key passes thrown in behind the linebackers too. I remember 3rd and 16, a 20-yard dig route to Bell as an example. So there were some balls thrown inside as well. But he's right about one thing. They threw a lot of footballs to the outside of the field. And so often, of course, we found it was against Hankins. It was their best receiver versus Hankins. And Hankins' biggest problem is he was really on an island. He didn't have a lot of help.
How big was the Riley Moss injury, Don, given the situation where we were at in the frame of time, just going into a game where traditionally Iowa does struggle to, especially in the secondary with corners? How big of a deal was that in hindsight to lose him right before the Purdue game? And would it have mattered?
I don't think it had much significance, to be honest with you, because so much of that passing yardage happened against Hankins. Terry Roberts, I made the comment to you. I think there's not much drop off at all between number 33 and number 22. Having said that, Terry would probably tell you himself that he really expected to play a better game than he did. I think he played okay. They didn't really test him a lot, as you know. They tried to double cut him one time, and he got flagged for defensive holding on that particular play. One of Bell's catches was in front of Roberts. But I don't honestly think that it would have mattered a whole lot whether it was 33 or 22 playing the other corner position. Most of the time they went after 8.
Don, I'm having an issue here with the caller line. Let me see if we can get this resolved. And maybe this is why we haven't gotten any calls yet. Let's see here. All right. This may take a moment. Appreciate everybody standing by here. You're going to hear our system.
Thank you for calling Collins Studios host and call screener line. Please enter your show or enter your 6-digit PIN number. That was an invalid PIN for Mark Rogers, voice of college football.
Okay, well,
please re-enter your 6-digit PIN. That must be why
we're having some issues. Well, I'll have to reach out to Mark here. Don, let's continue this conversation. I want to lose viewers as we discuss this game, try to figure out the technical glitches with the phone line. Do have a couple comments I wanted to get to. Underway shift colors. This is a positive comment. Appreciate this. He says Iowa will win out. I'm positive that this team will have refocused for the home stretch. Don, how confident are you? I know you're focused on Wisconsin, but how confident are you that this team will win out?
I have a question for Underway Shift Colors. Is he prepared to bet the farm on that? Because I certainly wouldn't bet my farm. It's nice that he has confidence that we're going to be able to get that done, but that's really faulty logic because it matters so much what the other team does. We can control our attitude and our execution, but we don't have a whole lot of control over what the other team might do from week to week. So it sounds good. That's what I'm hoping for. But the reality is we're going to have to make that happen. It's not just going to happen by accident.
Absolutely. And let's remember, we said before the season, what are the chances of Iowa winning out? And I remember you saying how small of a chance there was of Iowa doing that. Just mathematically, even teams like Alabama and Ohio State very rarely can completely run the table. And of course, we know that those schools have such an advantage as far as recruiting is concerned. But I will say this, Don, I keep saying it over and over again. If Iowa ends up losing 2 to 3 games, this is a missed opportunity, because if you look at the schedule, at least preseason, the toughest games in the schedule, Don, were Penn State, Iowa State, and we would have said Indiana at the time.
Right.
Now, I would still say Iowa State and Penn State are 1 and 2, and that kind of segues me into what I wanted to discuss. You mentioned Penn State, Illinois earlier. Did you get a chance to watch the 9 overtimes back?
I have not, and I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be on Big Ten Network late tonight. So
I'm sure it'll be on Big Ten Network a lot over the next week, Don.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm so happy for Brett. As you know, Illinois has had a rough season up until now. And truthfully, there weren't too many Penn State fans that thought they had anything to worry about at all yesterday afternoon. And the amazing thing is, 9 overtimes. So think about that for a second. On the first overtime, they traded field goals. On the second overtime, they traded field goals. And overtimes 3 through 9, they matched or finally failed to match on 2-point plays. So that means realizing that Illinois was only successful on 2 2-point plays. That means Illinois was successful on 2 out of 7, which left poor old Penn State successful on only 1 out of 7. So pretty amazing defense. I don't know. I haven't seen the plays yet. It's hard to imagine you wouldn't be more effective with 2-point plays than 1 out of 7 or even 2 out of 7. But that's the way it worked out in Happy Valley yesterday.
I did hear some people comment on social media afterwards how ridiculous it was that this new rule where you have to just go for 2-point conversions is supposed to shorten games, and it extends it to 9 overtimes. And my response was, that was great. Like, I loved watching that. To me, and there are less plays, Don. They're just running 2 plays per overtime. I think we're making too much of the fact that it was 9 overtimes.
Yeah, because you're only talking about 14 additional plays in those last 7 overtimes, right? They each had 7 attempts. So it's only, you're right. I don't know how many plays were involved in the first 2 overtime sessions, but in overtimes 3 through 9, it was a total of 14 snaps.
Yeah, and again, I think if you're an Iowa fan, I talked to a friend before we came on here this evening, Don, and the first reaction when you see this score that Penn State loses at home to an unranked Illinois team is crap. This hurts Iowa's strength of schedule. But hold on a second. This, in a way, now I don't know how the committee will look at losses or wins like this for a team like Illinois, but as far as the cumulative strength of schedule, as far as Iowa's division is concerned, this actually helps Iowa in a way because it makes that Western division look better. You've got Minnesota beating Maryland. Right. You got West over East there. You've got Illinois beating Penn State, West over East. And you've got Iowa, who's 3-0 against the East. So maybe the West is not as far behind. I know these are anecdotal examples, Don, but maybe the West isn't as far behind as we thought.
Right. You always hear the expression, too, that was a bad loss versus a good loss. Of course, the way the football world would think of it, a loss to Penn State is a good loss for Iowa. And yet Penn State's loss to Illinois would certainly be classified as a bad loss. So it certainly affects Penn State's status going forward. They're still going to have a good ranking, of course, because at the end they'll probably have a pretty darn good record. But let's not forget they've got some really challenging games coming up with those Eastern opponents.
Absolutely. Ed says Wisconsin has to pass against Iowa. That's a positive. I don't know what he means exactly by that's a positive. I will say this. It is a positive for Iowa in that Mertz has struggled. I don't know the last time I've seen a game, Don, where a team has won and in such a convincing fashion, throwing the ball 8 times.
Right.
I mean, that's insane.
I was going to ask Ed if he saw the Wisconsin-Purdue game because, as you know, Wisconsin threw 8 passes. So I don't think we should assume that Wisconsin will have to pass against Iowa. We have to make them need to throw the ball more because they'll be more than comfortable running the ball if we'll allow them to do it. So that's going to be a challenge for us. It's to slow down the running game because those backs are good backs, and of course they pride themselves on the run blocking. And let's not forget, in the past there have been times when Wisconsin very effectively ran the ball against Iowa, and it's a little bit wishful to think that that's not going to be the case this Saturday. We're going to have to make a real concerted effort to slow down that running game, because that's where it all starts. Think of it this way, Cory. We talked last week about failing to make Purdue play left-handed. Well, Wisconsin will be different than Purdue. Wisconsin will be more than happy to run the ball. So the challenge this week in making them play left-handed is to force them to throw the ball more than what they'd like.
Absolutely.
We have to find a way to get that done. And it all starts with being effective on first and second down, put them into third and long rather than allowing them to be in third and medium or third and short.
Don, I'll be honest, I missed a good portion of that game, and I'll be watching it back here as the week continues. Didn't get a chance to watch it today. But Wisconsin turned the ball over how many times?
Twice. No? But they actually fumbled 5 times, but only lost 2.
Yeah, so they are prone to fumbles, and Mertz got rocked in that first half on a play that ended up being a fumble. I believe was that the play where Karlaftis scooped and scored? So
I'm not sure. I think so.
So a couple things there, Don. Wisconsin scored 30, and they ran the ball well. Here's what I will say: there were a couple chunk plays, if I recall, at least 140-some yard run, a 70-yard run. So they ran the ball. Their rushing numbers were impressive, but again, as far as their rushing numbers or their rushing averages, they were inflated by those exceptions. And then again, as far as their passing game is concerned, Purdue kind of kept themselves in that game. I believe it was 13-13 at halftime, in large part because of that sack that scoop and score by Karlaftis.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, the game was 13-13 through the middle of the third quarter, and that's when the 70-yard run popped up. And just a couple of plays later was the really outstanding run where he should have been tackled in the backfield by Malusi, the other back.
Yeah.
So they're both good backs. As the freshman gains experience, I think it'll be a better blend. I think Malusi had 27 carries. The freshman, I believe, only had 12 very productive carries. I would bet against us, and for the rest of the season, you'll see the freshmen end up with a little higher percentage of carries. Maybe at some point, of course, he might even overtake Malusi in terms of who carries the ball the most. But they've got a really good 1-2 punch at running back, and we've got to be able to slow those guys down and force them into thinking they have to throw the ball more than what they'd like.
Okay, this one's going to cut off your face here, Don, because it's a long comment.
Okay.
Question from John. He says, I think I have this right, but if a freshman player got a free year last year, redshirted this year, they will have 2 years of practice and 4 years of eligibility next year. I believe that's accurate, Don, right? The COVID year is not a substitute for if you want to call it an organic redshirt year. So technically, if all parties involved are on board here, technically those guys would have 6 years, just like a guy like Spencer would, correct?
I'm not sure of that, Cory. And the only reason I say that is I've heard people make reference this year right now. The guys that are in the 6th year, they're referred to as super seniors, right?
Right.
You've heard that term. I've also heard people make the comment, this is the one and only year where you'll actually have the super senior effect. So I don't know that the young guys that experienced last year's COVID season are going to get that same benefit of a 6th year. I think the only people that get the benefit of that 6th year are the ones that are in their 6th year now. Okay. I'm not sure of that, but that's the impression I got with somebody making the comment that there's only going to be one group of super seniors, and that's the ones that are super seniors right now.
Well, if that's the case, Don, because again, that's not how I understood it, and I'm not saying I've gotten anything specifically that would override what you just got done saying, but my understanding on it was anybody who was a student athlete during the COVID year would have an extra year of eligibility, regardless, if they've already redshirted or not, which would also, this is going to, obviously, this question will be answered eventually because guys like Spencer Petras technically could be here through the 2023 season, which I know there's plenty of guys who are Spencer Petras fans, but there's going to be a segment of the fan base that dreads that thought, Don. But that will definitely come back to play here with a lot of these guys. I I guess that's a good question, and I'll have to look into that this week. But good question from John.
Yeah, the one person that can answer that question would be compliance with Iowa athletics. You could call up compliance and get that definitive answer from them. That is a good question. I obviously don't know the answer. Yeah. But the impression I had is this might be the only year where we have the additional effect of super seniors. I could be wrong, but here's another reason that it doesn't make much sense long-term to keep allowing people to be here for 6 years is now you still got the same number of scholarship limitations, at least down the road. I don't know that they're going to want to spread. You have, what's the number right now? I think it's either 90 or 95, I think, right now, full scholarships available to football. And do you want to spread them out over 6 years for each of the next 5 years or 4 years, whatever the case might be? I don't know. I'm not sure that that's the plan. Obviously, your recruiting classes would have to be a little bit smaller if you're going to spread them out over an additional year for the next few years to come.
Underway Shift Color says another area, and of course he's referring to Iowa versus Wisconsin. Another area is D-line. Must get the quarterback, Graham Mertz, uneasy in the pocket. He is prone to mistakes if this happens. Absolutely, Don. He is very...
Yeah, one thing that's really amazing with Wisconsin, it ties directly into Mertz. If I'm not mistaken, this graphic showed up during the Purdue game. At that point in time, at least, they had turned the ball over 6 times in the first 3 quarters of play, and amazingly enough, 9 times in the fourth quarter. And, of course, a lot of those were interceptions. Thinking back to the Michigan game and Notre Dame game in particular, I guess. So you're right about one thing. The viewer's right, the listener's right. If you can put extra pressure on Mertz, up until now, he hadn't handled it very well, and that might be a key to the game on Saturday. I will say this: if we don't win on turnovers against Wisconsin, it's going to be very difficult to win the game.
Absolutely. And of course, Wisconsin, that would make sense simply because Wisconsin does play such a similar brand of football to Iowa. And we saw turnovers, like you said, Don, prove to be huge. Iowa, Purdue, and of course, Purdue, Wisconsin. Want to say hi to Bob. Bob is a loyal listener, and appreciate you being on here this evening, Bob. Also, Paul Hoffer. He says Hawkeyes must win out. Period. And appreciate you listening as well. Underway Shift Colors all the way from Virginia Beach. So appreciate you logging on here this evening. Okay, so Blake brings this up. He called, was on hold for 5 minutes, then he got hung up on. I apologize for that, Blake. We're having some technical issues. So I'm going to try to get this resolved here because I did promise people that they could call in. So we're going to try this again. And again, I appreciate everybody standing by on this. Again, you're going to hear our caller system, Voice of College Football's caller system, ringing in here, and hopefully we can get this working. I've never had this issue before, so.
Thank you for calling Call-In Studios host and call screener line. Please enter your show or meeting number and press pound. Enter your 6-digit PIN number. Welcome, host. You are now in the host room and can manage your callers from the Call-In Studio web interface.
Well, let's see if it works. All right. Give us a call, Blake, or anybody else who wants to call. And if it doesn't work this time, this is going to have to be either a discussion with Mark Rogers or discuss with Call-In Studio. And I have not dealt with Call-In Studio's customer service, so I'll have to go through Mark on that. Hopefully it works. Give us a call. Help us figure it out if it does. 860-499-3332. It's at the bottom of the screen there. 860-499-3332. Okay. Comment here from Ray. Iowa State, Penn State, and Iowa win out is the only way we get into the playoffs. I don't agree with this, but I don't think Iowa State and Penn State have to. I don't think Iowa State and Penn State have to do anything special, Don. If Iowa's 12-1, including a win against either Ohio State, Michigan State, or Michigan, how do you leave a 12-1 Big Ten champion out?
that team would be in.
I
I
agree.
guess the only conceivable way I can think of, if we went out to get to Indianapolis and then we beat the representative in Indianapolis, let's assume it's a one-loss Ohio State team. That would certainly put us in. The only scenario maybe that wouldn't work out so well is if we end up playing a team in Indy that's got 3 losses, and I don't see that happening. Of course, it's either going to be 1 loss or 2 at the most.
Yep.
And even then, if it's a 2-loss Ohio State or a 2-loss Michigan or a 2-loss Michigan State, or conceivably, I guess Penn State still only has 2 losses. Is that right? Then I would think even then the Big Ten rep would be in, because the conference has simply been too highly ranked for too long this year. We've had 5 teams in the top 10 or top 11, even here in the midseason. And the winner in Indianapolis, it'll be, if they have 1 loss, I think they're in, almost certainly in.
All right. I think the call line is working at this moment. Hopefully we can get audio here. Thank you for calling Iowa, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Good evening, gentlemen. This is Blake James.
Hey, Blake.
This is going to take a little bit of an intro to kind of explain where I'm coming from here. But
okay,
I grew up a 49ers fan, of course, a Hawkeye fan. So I was around, during the 80s 49ers and all through the 90s and stuff like that. And one of the things that intrigued me was the similarities between the Hawkeyes and the 49ers. They never really had like what you'd call elite athletes. And they both always ran a different kind of offense from other teams. They were kind of the pioneers of the West Coast way back in the day. But the thing that I wanted to gear this question towards and get Don's input was, I wanted to know if he was familiar with like the Harbaugh era 49ers, like when they had Alex Smith and their offense that they ran. It was very strange, and I don't have the vocabulary or the football knowledge to know exactly what it was, but they had a lot of like double tights. They do offset formations, offset eyes, and they'd have bunches, and it was like, it almost seemed like gadget plays all the time. Like they just put weird formations out there to throw the defense off, and they didn't have a whole lot of great athletes, even in the Harbaugh era, when Alex Smith was playing quarterback. But they won games. They were a little bit better than average offense, but they're very efficient, and it seems like that would be something that could be implemented at Iowa. Is there a name for that kind of offense of what Harbaugh was doing back then? And is that something that you could see the coaching staff at Iowa do?
Good question. I'm not that familiar with the 49ers back in the Harbaugh years. I do recall, of course, that they found ways to win. The thing that sticks in my mind about the 49ers when he was the coach there is they did a good job of not beating themselves. And frankly, there's some parallels maybe that align with Michigan right now. Michigan's doing a good job of really just playing fundamental football, and I think that's the way Harbaugh would prefer to play. There's nothing really that flashy about Michigan, but they're sound defensively. They don't give up many big plays. They run the ball well. Prefer not to throw it maybe more than 20 times a game. Maybe that's almost identical to the 49ers back then. I would suspect they threw it more than 20 times, which is typical, of course, for any NFL team. Probably had a little more balance between run and pass than what a college team might have. But right now, I'd be curious if Michigan's throwing more than 20 times a game. My guess is the average is on or about 20. They're running the ball effectively. They're playing good defense, and they're not beating themselves. So I don't have a good name to describe the old 49er offense because I simply didn't see that much of them. But I'm not surprised to hear you say it involves a lot of 2 tight end stuff and sometimes tight end wing or a lot of motion involving a tight end, which means he could serve as a blocking back a lot of the time and coming across the formation in motion. Of course, you can slip him out in the flat on play action and hit him for some ball control passes. That's effective. We do that same kind of thing here at Iowa, of course. But any kind of movement offense like that probably does involve 1 or more tight ends, certainly 1, and a lot of the time even 2. And maybe when we get Lachey back, I would imagine he'll be back for Wisconsin. You'll see a greater use of 2 tight ends like you saw in the earlier parts of the season. Not so much against Purdue, but certainly prior to Purdue, we had a lot of 2 tight sets.
Yeah, the thing that was neat about that offense back then is you never really knew what was coming. There was a whole lot of there was a whole lot of different options, and every formation was just a little bit different. They tweaked it a little bit different, and they did a lot of different snap counts, and it kind of surprised the defense. It didn't seem like they were able to adjust from one snap to the next, and they were basically running the same personnel, just very different setups. They'd even put offset linemen and stuff like that. It was kind of crazy, but again, very effective. And it just seems like a natural fit for something like, Iowa, when they have the emphasis on not only having fullbacks, but, concentrating on quality tight ends that can do both things.
Yeah,
I didn't know about Lachey being injured though.
One thing we have done, just because we're in what we call 12 personnel, you might be familiar with that term. That means one back and two tight ends. Just because you have 12 personnel on the field doesn't even mean you have any attached tight ends. When I'm saying attached tight ends, I'm talking about a tight end lined up immediately adjacent to an offensive tackle. So in our case, of course, you might see one of those tight ends in the backfield. You might see the other one actually flexed off. You might see one attached beside a tackle, and you might see a wingback tight end right outside of him. So in a lot of cases, it would involve motion to put that tight end that's off the ball back into the backfield. And for that, we'll see our tight end step off the ball and then go in motion, of course. So you see a lot of set changes or even double set changes that involve movement by the tight end. That's part of our game. A lot of the time it's simply designed to confuse the defense a little bit, make them maybe think about what might be coming rather than being focused on their assignment and their execution so well. They get a little preoccupied with just trying to figure out what the play might be based on the motion or based on the jump formation. So it's really a little bit of window dressing, if you will. But a lot of the time it really is designed to put that key player in the right position immediately before the snap. And at least in that regard, the defense doesn't have a lot of time to think about what might be coming.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was pretty much all I had to say. I don't know that I explained myself very well, but that piqued my interest, and I'm a fan of the 49ers from days past, and I'd like to see that kind of intensity and consistency.
I have a question for you, Blake, before you go, and maybe Don can give some input on this as well. As I'm listening to you guys talk from two different perspectives, does Michigan really run a whole lot of? I mean, are tight ends really a big part of their offense now, Don?
I think a lot of the time they just play with one tight end. I haven't seen a lot of Michigan on TV yet, but my recollection is they play a lot with 21 personnel with the one tight end and two backs in the backfield and a lot of traditional pro formation football.
So my question is, why have they not? I wonder why Jim Harbaugh has not recruited to follow what was a winning mold in San Francisco.
That's a very good question. That just tells me that maybe Harbaugh wasn't really the brainchild behind it all. Maybe it was the offensive coordinator. You do bring up a good point, caller. One thing that could be done, and we did it in certain cases, we would maybe go back in the offseason, go back and look at a particular, maybe a pro offense or maybe another college offense that seemed to represent more innovation. That's what you're talking about is the 49ers at that time, you felt, and you're probably right, were accomplishing a lot with limited personnel, in part just because they were more innovative than the average NFL staff. And there's nothing wrong at all. There's that expression, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Nothing wrong at all with a team maybe pulling up some video, even if it was from a game 8 years ago. If it's pertinent, it's still pertinent. And it is kind of surprising maybe that what Harbaugh did with the 49ers has not been more often copied or at least attempted to be copied. And it sounds to me, as best I know, nobody's done it nearly as well as the 49ers did.
One of the things that kind of led up to Harbaugh being coach before him was Mike Singletary. And they had run through, I don't know how many coaches before that, but the 49ers were pretty terrible for a long time. And I think Singletary only coached there for maybe 3 years. But I think he got pressure to the front office on draft day because they made an effort to trade down and get rid of their first round draft picks. And they were drafting a lot of late round, late first round and a lot of second and third round guys. Yeah. And they built up an incredible offensive line. And of course they went 8-8, and the 49ers fired him. And I thought, this guy brought you guys from going 3-13 and 4-12 to 8-8, and you're getting rid of him. Why are you doing that? But Harbaugh had Vernon Davis. He wasn't as a tight end. He wasn't a great pass blocker, I wouldn't say, but they had a good set of backups, and they had a great offensive line. It seems like a natural fit with Iowa. Where you don't have to run the spread just because it's popular. To me, you would kind of run an offense, run a defense that's complementary to your players and your personnel and your strengths. And it seems like that would be something that Iowa could do.
And Blake, I totally agree with you. Are you watching the 49ers game? Is that why it was on your mind?
Oh, no. I quit watching the NFL a long time ago. It's gotten way too political, and it's I consider the NFL to be pretty much trash nowadays.
Well, I see where you're coming from. I will say the 49ers are ahead of the Colts right now, 12-7. So just to give you a little update.
When the 49ers benched Alex Smith when he was the highest rated quarterback in the NFL, and they were 6-1 or 7-1, and then they put Kaepernick on the field, that's when I quit watching them. I thought they did Alex Smith wrong, and the front office was just trying to create excitement so they could sell season tickets for their new stadium that they were about to open up, and it was transparent, and I could see through it, and it didn't seem like they were interested in having a quality franchise anymore. So
I like the NFL, but pro sports is unfortunately a lot about money and politics, and we're seeing that more than ever now. Anything else, Blake?
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Have a good evening.
Appreciate it. Have a good evening. All right, and we do have another caller here. Before we get to our next call, I do want to. I don't want to get too far behind on a couple of these comments that I think are valid. CK16 says, I would say losing Moss wasn't so much of a loss of skill, but the leadership from him that could have helped maybe a little bit against Purdue. Can't argue about that, Don, although I would think that leadership would still transfer into the locker room, even if he's not playing in the game.
Yeah, and I was going to suggest that Moss did a good job, I'm sure, leading from the bench. So I think the leadership still can exist, even if he's not on the playing field. Everybody knows he wants to be out there, and of course, the best places to lead is from the game field itself. It's a little bit more difficult to lead from the bench, but I think you'd be wrong if you assume that Riley Moss didn't provide us with some leadership, even though he wasn't in fact playing. I'm sure he did.
Blake says, this is the same Blake that just called in, I believe. He says Don lives on a farm. Was that? Did you make a reference to being a farmer, Don?
No, maybe I bet the farm one too many times and I lost my farm, I guess.
You use that
expression. It was just an old Hayden expression, bet the farm. Don't bet the farm.
This is proof, Don, that everybody loves you, because as soon as Blake asks this question, Ray comes back and says, Don is a goat farmer.
Ray, you're my kind of guy.
I love it. Okay, let's get to our caller here. Has been waiting patiently. Thank you for calling Iowa at the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hawkeye Howard.
Hawkeye Howard. Are you working today, Hawkeye? You get Sunday off.
I got Sunday off.
Good for you.
The reason why I called, I wanted to talk a little bit about Spencer.
Sure.
And
let's talk about Spencer.
Well, you know as well as Cory, you talked about it, and I've talked about it. He can't run. He's got to learn to run out of that pocket somehow. I don't know how, because I watched a little bit of the game, Wisconsin game. Those boys are going to know this, and they're going to come for him. He's going to get hurt if he don't run.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Don?
What are your thoughts, Don?
Well, you've heard me say before, Spencer needs to learn how to slide, because if he carries the ball too many times across the line of scrimmage, he's really not very, very adept at protecting himself right now. And I'm afraid that it's only a matter of time before he gets caught in a really awkward position and might get injured. So I hope he's prepared to get out of bounds or get on the ground. The only way to get on the ground safely is to slide. You need to be able to do that. And again, there's that off week that maybe gives us a little extra time to work on some fundamentals. So maybe that's one of the things that was addressed last week. It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, because it was only obvious that Spencer's not very well equipped to handle the requirements of being an effective scrambler. He's got to practice that and get better at it in practice, not on game field, but out on the practice field.
And also, I just thought the offensive line didn't protect him very well against Purdue. I was very disappointed in the guys up front. Of course, I'm not out there. I mean, I'm too old to be out there, but still, they should at least. I mean, they're good athletes. I just didn't think they protected him enough.
That's true.
What's your opinion on that?
The line is not performing great in any aspect. Again, I thought they ran the ball okay in that first half, but it hasn't been consistent, like Don brought out. Yeah. The run blocking has just not been consistent enough. And again, we can make excuses. The offensive line, especially the exterior of the offensive line, although Connor Colby is starting at right guard right now, Don, and he's a freshman. So you got a lot of young guys, underclassmen, who are playing on this line. They've dealt with injuries. Schott's been out several games. Cody Ince missed this last game. So, I would think there's a lack of camaraderie with some of these guys, and then you add in youth and a quarterback who, you brought it up, Hawkeye Howard, the guy can't escape the pocket. He also doesn't know how to step forward in the pocket and make a play. It's a bad combination. And I'm not going to put this on Don. I'm going to put this on myself. I'm disappointed in Ken O'Keefe because the elements of being able to slide, for instance, and Don has brought that up, but the ability to slide, I don't think is that complicated of a skill to learn or to teach. I wouldn't think, at least. And it's consistently been one of those things that's never been taught at Iowa, at least in the last 10 to 15 years. Like, I'm sure Ricky Stanzi could slide, but I'm thinking CJ Beathard, Nate Stanley, Spencer Petras, none of those guys knew how to slide. That's, to me, basics of QB 101. And again, you can say shame on Spencer Petras, but we see a pattern here over the years. To me, that's coaching. And I know Ken O'Keefe wasn't here during the CJ Beathard era, but he is the quarterback's coach now. That's a simple thing that could be fixed, I would think. Am I wrong, Don?
I would say if Spencer had a background in baseball, he'd probably know how to slide because he would have spent time doing it and conducting himself as a baseball player. My guess is he never played baseball. If he did, he didn't play it any huge amount of time because the slide is simply part of the game, of course, in baseball. And it needs to become part of the game for any quarterback because that's one more way that they can protect themselves. And it's been, he was exposed in the past because he didn't do a good job of getting down and protecting himself. And the off week presented a great opportunity for actually some time to be able to practice things like that. And hopefully that was done. We'll find out a little bit on Saturday if he has a reason to slide on a particular play against the Badgers and he doesn't do it. Then we'll know, in fact, it still hadn't been corrected. But it's entirely possible that we'll see a Spencer this Saturday that does slide. And at that point, we'll know it probably was practiced on the off week.
And Howard, I'm not trying to rip Ken O'Keefe. I'm just very disappointed in that. And just a quick reference to Nate Stanley. Don, you mentioned Spencer, had he been a baseball player, he would know how to slide. Nate Stanley was a terrific baseball player in high school and didn't know how to slide. Now, he's a pitcher, but
if he was batting, he must have hit a lot of round trippers and he didn't have to get on first and still second.
I'm just disappointed by it. And I'm putting this on myself. This is not Don saying, this is me. I just am disappointed with quarterback development at Iowa. I talked about it earlier in the week on the show. Not saying it can't improve, but this is I believe the highest paid, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, Ken O'Keefe is the highest paid quarterbacks coach in the country. Quarterback play needs to be better. I'm all in on that notion, Hawkeye Howard.
Yeah. Another thing is I just wanted to get you guys' opinion on this. The play calling. Okay. And I just thought they were just stubborn in their play calling. It was the same plays. Purdue knew exactly what they were going to, and what form they were going to do. Purdue scouted Iowa perfectly. There's something going to have to change there. They're going to have to hide it somehow if they can. I'm not a coach, but I just thought they were with Kurt. Always is he's so stubborn with these play calls.
Well, Cory, as you pointed out, against Purdue, Tyler, if I'm not mistaken, averaged 5.7 yards per carry against Purdue. Isn't that true?
Well, I'd have to look it up. He certainly had a good average in that first half, but he didn't run much in the second, so that wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, the thing that sticks in my mind, and I discussed this before, it may sound silly, but it's really true. Part of our problem against Purdue, our defense did a poor job of getting off the field, allowed Purdue to convert way too many critical downs. And as a result of that, they did a good job of time of possession. They certainly controlled the ball. Their offense was on the field a lot more than ours. And it may sound like an excuse, but there really is an element of truth to it. If an offense is not on the field for any length of time, it's hard for them to gain a rhythm to the game. And part of that blame has to lie with the offense, of course, because your job, if you want to be able to work yourself into a good rhythm, then obviously you got to make some first downs and be able to stay on the field. I don't know how many 8-play possessions we had against Purdue. There certainly weren't very many, 1 or 2 probably.
But you're right, Don. I just looked it up here. It's 12 carries for Tyler against Purdue for 68 yards, an average of 5.7 a carry. And Kelly Martin averaged 3.8, which isn't great, but it's healthy. 6 carries for 23 yards. They ran the ball well against Purdue.
Right. And for that matter, of course, if we weren't -3 on turnovers, then maybe we wouldn't be discussing our inability to run the ball better, because maybe it would have been good enough.
Anything else, Hawkeye Howard?
All right. No, that's it. Unfortunately, I can't watch the game this week, because I have my anniversary on the same day. And my birthday's on Sunday. So.
Well, I'm sure the wife would understand, right? Right, Don? The wife always understands when football takes precedent.
If not, then TiVo will understand maybe.
Yes, TiVo is our friend.
Yes. 13 years with my lovely wife. And
congratulations,
and
and enjoy the weekend, and don't let the Iowa game bring you down if it doesn't go the way we want it to go.
My recommendation: go ahead and copy the game, and then be sure that no one tells you the outcome, so that when you watch it later that night or the next day, you'll still be in doubt as to who actually won the game.
Well, see, unfortunately, my birthday's the next day after my wedding anniversary. My wife planned it that way, so I wouldn't forget. But anyway, thank you, gentlemen, and go Hawks.
Appreciate it, Hawkeye Howard. Go Hawks. Have a great evening. And I agree. And again, I'm not trying. I hope I'm not coming off too strong on Ken. I like Ken. I think he's a nice guy. He's a good coach. But that, to me, it gets to a point where you continue to see players fail. Isn't that coaching done at some point? I mean, I'm not talking about Iowa. I'm just talking about any team. If you see the same issues with multiple players, then that comes back to coaching.
Well, I know how Coach Fry felt. What your players did or did not do was a direct reflection on you as a coach. And it would behoove you to, if you want to keep your job a long time, to be sure your players perform at a high level, because that's really ultimately what teaching's all about.
Absolutely agree. You see our phone number, our caller lines are open, 860-499-3332. Bob says Wisconsin's D-line took the game over. Absolutely true. Blake, actually, kind of a surprising comment from Blake. He thinks we win easily against Wisconsin. I would not bet on that. The game that really concerns him is Minnesota, followed by Nebraska. All 3 of those games are concerning games. And I refuse to take Northwestern lightly just because of Pat Fitzgerald's history against Iowa. I know they look bad again on Saturday. Don, did you get any glimpse of that Michigan Northwestern game?
I didn't. I just simply felt that it was such a routine win for Michigan. I think Michigan's for real. I'm not saying they're going to win the East, but they certainly have a chance to, because it's a team that Bo Schembechler would like, because it's a team that's grounded on fundamentals and plays good defense and doesn't make many mistakes and runs the ball effectively. I don't think they've turned it over much at all. So it's really kind of a meat and potatoes football team, but that's typically what has won for Michigan in the past.
Appreciate this comment from Blake. Just a reminder, I don't want to promote this too much, but please give us a like. Tell your friends about our show if you're enjoying the content. Certainly, your other Hawkeye friends and family will enjoy it as well. And you're welcome to donate. If you do donate, go down to the comment section below, and please, whatever way you donate, please make a note that it's for the Iowa channel so that the funds can go to support this content and our show. Underway shift colors. He says, what Wisconsin running backs not even close to other backs in the Big Ten. Michigan State, Michigan, Iowa, and all the Bucknuts have better backs. I would agree, but boy, they're running the ball well, Don, and they've done it against. I mean, they did it against Illinois with big numbers. They did it against Purdue. I think it's a scary proposition to kind of discredit them because they don't have a Melvin Gordon or a Jonathan Taylor on that roster.
Well, I suspect that Underway didn't see the Purdue game last weekend against Wisconsin. They ran for 290, and even if you take out those two huge explosive plays, they still ran for almost 200. So that's pretty significant yardage, especially, as you mentioned, Cory. Part of our problem is we gain 8 on one play and 0 the next. Wisconsin's more the kind of team that gains 4 every time. And you'd rather have that kind of consistency, of course, rather than to be so much hit and miss.
Absolutely. We do have another call here. Thank you for calling Iowa at the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Well, I'll call myself Hawkeye John.
Hawkeye John, how are you today?
Great. How are you guys?
We are doing fantastic. It's rare that we have a show on a Sunday evening, and I'm enjoying it. And we're previewing what I believe to be a very, very massive game this coming Saturday for Iowa.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you're right to say that. There's been a lot of talk about last week, and we kind of forgot about what we're going to do here this next week. And Wisconsin, I found it kind of interesting that their defensive performance has yielded them the toughest run defense, I think, maybe in the nation. I was wondering what you guys might think about what Iowa's going to do in their rushing game to try to combat that.
Don, you have any thoughts on that? I know you probably have some tape to watch this week before Saturday.
Well, I do flash back on the times when we played a defense that simply looked almost impenetrable. Is that the right word? A defensive team that would give you a lot of problems in terms of being able to run the ball. The thing that comes to mind for me, you look at even more video to try to come up with some answers. And maybe as a result of them being so good at what they do, you end up with a smaller list of plays, but at least there are a small group of plays that you feel good about that can produce. And obviously, just to give you some random numbers, rather than coming up with 20 different running plays that can work, maybe you only come up with 8. But at least those 8 plays, you're going to get even more repetitions in preparation for the game with those plays that you do have great confidence in. And sometimes I've seen it work so that the smaller run list actually produces better numbers, in part because you probably got more repetitions in practice and you simply understood exactly why those were the best plays versus the next opponent. So you might see something like that happen. So the beauty of having to use your imagination to come up with any kind of playlist at all for a game, it simply means you put more thought into those fewer plays that you got ready to go for the game. And as a result of that extra thought, maybe the plays you're putting on the field actually have a better chance for success, if only because of the X's and O's. I hope that makes sense to you. But rather than have 25 different runs, none of which you got a lot of work on because there's not enough time to get them all prepared well, you got a smaller list that you prepared better. And oftentimes that does produce better results.
Well, especially with this line that's inexperienced, and maybe they just need to focus on a few plays that makes it work. And that makes a total sense to me. I guess I would like to flip it to the other side of the ball. And I found it very interesting that Wisconsin ran the ball on a Purdue team that had a defensive end that I thought was stellar last week and awesome. I mean, those guys yielded, I think, 2 100-yard rushers in Wisconsin. So I'm really concerned about the running on both sides of the ball coming up this week. And I just wonder if 2 weeks of preparation. Obviously, our coaches are not stupid. They know what's coming. My goodness, we've got ourselves a slobber knocker coming here.
Well, we haven't given up many yards to opposing running backs all season, Don. Am I correct in saying that? I mean, I'm trying to think back. There really hasn't been any team that's been able to take advantage of Iowa's linebackers and the D-line.
Yeah, no one's really sliced us and diced us in the running game. I will say this, my impressions in watching Purdue, most of those yards happened between the tackles. They were plays up the gut, if you will. And, of course, they sometimes turned into a big gainer, but it all started with them clearing the line of scrimmage through the A gap or the B gap, through the center guard gap or the guard tackle gap so much of the time. So, you got to realize Wisconsin just committed to being able to do that. They'd like to think they're going to be able to 4-yard you to death. And if they gain 4 yards, of course, on first and second down, it means they're going to convert on third down. And sometimes, of course, those plays that are run up the middle sometimes turn into explosive plays because the backs are good enough to maybe make a guy miss in the open field. And at that point, the race is on.
The other thing I wanted to hopefully have you comment on was I found it interesting that the Purdue team that came into that game was one of the worst turnover takeaway teams in the nation. They turned around and managed to get a bunch of turnovers against Iowa, turned the script, so to speak. And it was interesting. I found in Wisconsin stats, Wisconsin essentially did the same thing. They got 5 turnovers in that game. So they're rolling. So it's interesting. I think this game is a hell of a game coming up.
John, right? I'm not forgetting your name, right?
Yeah.
John,
yep.
One thing I will say about the turnovers, and I don't want to say it's just an outlier, but I'm sure you'd agree, Don, those turnovers against Iowa. I mean, I think back to the first interception for Spencer Petras. That was not forced by Purdue. That was just a really high throw. It was high and hot from Spencer and deflected right into the arms of a Purdue player. And then a couple of the late interceptions were just garbage time picks where Spencer's forcing the ball. I'm not saying you don't give any credit to Purdue, but those are really unforced errors.
Yeah, you're right. 2 of the 4 interceptions, I'd say, were in that category. Bonehead plays on our part, high throw for the first interception. Then you remember the comeback that was thrown down on the goal line.
Yeah. Dumb route. It's a dumb play call.
Crazy to throw the ball late outside down toward the goal line because the corner simply has nowhere else to go. There's no more field to defend. So, yeah, he's going to contest a comeback that's thrown near the goal line and not just contest it, but in his case, of course, he intercepted.
Anything else, John?
I just wondered about the injury status for Moss and how we're looking with. I'm sure Hankins is going to be okay, but have you heard anything about that guy?
The latest I've heard from Kirk is that all the guys who were hurt this past week have a chance heading into Wisconsin. But Kirk did not meet with the media midweek. It was, of course, the assistants, and I don't really recall. You can look this up through the Iowa Hawkeyes YouTube channel, and you can, of course, listen to Brian and Phil and those guys. But I don't think there were many injury updates. I would guess that just pure speculation based on what I've heard, that all those guys do have a solid chance of playing. And that's big on a lot of fronts. Don talked about Lachey coming back. Boy, that does help you immensely because now you open up a whole different aspect of your playbook. Certainly need help on the offensive line with Ince coming back. Moss coming back doesn't hurt either. And, Hankins came back in the game. If he was not, if there was any risk of further injury, to me, the coaches would not have put him back in the game, especially with the bye week. I would think he'd be fine. Yeah,
I do recall, too, that Laporta was really dragging at the end of the game. He was a fatigued football player because he played more snaps against Purdue simply because Lachey wasn't involved at all. And this is something to think about. I do know when I first saw that, when I looked at the numbers for Purdue, I looked first for Bell's stats, and of course he had 33 yards receiving. His long reception was 10 yards, but I couldn't picture in my head who the leading receiver was, a guy over 100 yards. And then when I saw the replay today, now it hit me again. It was the tight end. That's the guy that had a lot of catches. A lot of that was cover 2. They were getting the tight end in behind the linebackers with play action. and made some good plays with him. And the reason I think of that, of course, is that might suggest that this is a big game for Laporta, and also for Lachey too, maybe a chance to utilize tight ends. And who knows how Wisconsin will play us? Maybe they'll play us maybe a lot differently than they played Purdue. I don't think they're afraid to line up with so many soft corners against us as they were Purdue. They played a lot of rolled corners against Purdue and played a lot of two high safeties, and the tight end did expose them a little bit there. I would imagine against us they'll play more quarters coverage, bring those safeties down, get them involved in run defense, and dare you to throw a bunch of one-on-one routes outside, because that's not really our nature. That's what I would suspect is going to happen this weekend.
Well, I sure do appreciate everything you guys do here. Love listening to you, and I just have one prediction, and that is I think our game time coming up this weekend is going to be less than 3 hours. So I'm going to hang up now. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate the call, John. Did he say our game time is going to be left? What does that mean?
I think he meant start to finish is going to be less than 3 hours. And I think he might be right. You know, Wisconsin and Iowa both have a –
just because we're on the ball, run the clock?
Yeah, I think he sees a lot of running plays and not too many stoppages.
I will say this. Here's what helps that notion, Don. Let me get to it here. It's an ESPN game. That helps because everybody always talks about the long commercial breaks with Fox, and I don't know if I haven't timed the games to see if there's anything to that notion. But anyways, and we do have – Don, I want to be respectful to your time here. We're having – obviously, we had a slight delay with the calls. Are you able to stay on with us longer? If not, then we'll cut it early. But we are sitting here at over an hour. But I want to be respectful to your Sunday evening and to your wife.
Well, thank you, Cory. I'm okay. This is going to be an easier week for me. I finished off the senior college the class that I teach. That was the last session was last Thursday, and what else do I not have to do? Something else this week I don't have to do. So I know what it is. I don't have a game this next weekend for the Missouri Valley. So I don't have that preparation to worry about either. So I'm okay. When we're done here tonight, I'll start on analytics, and I'll simply look at those 5 conference games that were played yesterday and analyze those based on who won and who lost certain analytics.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time, Don. We do have another caller. Before we get to our next caller, Joseph asks, where is David Cove? I think he's referring to, why is he not seeing the field? Well, he is a freshman, true freshman. Obviously, Connor Colby has progressed. I know David Cove was a very highly touted kid out of high school. He had an injury. I know I don't know what type of injury. Kirk talked about it kind of in passing. I believe preseason he was dealing with an injury. I'm assuming he's healthy now, but again, he's a freshman. So Kirk is trying. I've seen a little bit of a shortened rotation. We're not seeing. Although, again, we were down ends this past week, so maybe there's nothing to that. But, boy, you keep adding guys to that offensive line, even if David Cove was ready, Don. To me, doesn't that hurt rhythm, especially in the run game, when you start shifting guys in that much? 7, 8 guys?
Well, you would like to think at this point, I remember years ago, Kirk always commented, we don't have to have 10 offensive linemen that can play winning football, but we certainly need 8. And 8's a good number to work with, and that would simply allow for a backup center. It would allow for a third guard. And obviously one of those 3 guards would have to be adept at playing both left and right. So effectively you have a 2 deep with 3 players. Same at tackle. You got a minimum of 3 tackles that can play winning football. And again, one of them has to be comfortable playing both left and right-handed. It's more difficult. Obviously you practice with 10 guys, but maybe a couple of them are there just to facilitate the practice, and you don't really have confidence in them being out there when the game's on the line.
And a correction here, or I guess a clarification, according to this user who was on the NCAA website, I guess, he says that everyone, freshmen through seniors, are granted an extra year of eligibility, whether they played or not. They cite a freshman case as an example. So again, that would tell me, Don, I'm not saying you were wrong on that, but that would tell me that all these guys were going to have that domino effect that people were afraid of. Now, again, we don't know if this is the case. We don't know how many of those guys will actually exercise that extra year. And I would think the coaches have something to do with that, Don. If they say, look, Spencer, or whoever it is, we don't have room for you for a 6th year. I mean, can they do that?
Absolutely. The players will certainly they'll get an idea from the coaches as to whether or not they'd like to have them back. And you're right. Some guys would understand that I'm really not that prominent in the plans for next year. So it's a polite way of the coaches telling me, why don't you just move on? And but there is something to be said for experience. And obviously a 6th-year player, you'd like to believe, has an even better chance to excel than a 5th-year player would.
Well, I smell controversy if things don't change at the quarterback position in a year or two. Thank you for calling Iowa postgame. Or not, this isn't Iowa postgame. There's no game we're recapping. This is just Iowa at the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line?
Hello, guys. This is Yakov, or known as Yakov22.
Yakov22, how are you on a Sunday?
I'm doing well. First of all, I want to tell you guys it's a real treat to get to just have this. Usually, when I have you guys on, I'm also watching a college football game and a whole bunch of following other things too. And now just watch this.
This is enjoyable. I'm liking this on a Sunday. I'm sure Don wouldn't want to do this every Sunday, but I watched plenty of NFL football earlier this afternoon, so this is kind of relaxing to cap off my weekend.
Yeah, I saw a game or two also, so now I'm recapping some stuff here. But actually, I know this is an Iowa show, so I respect it, but I was wondering if I could ask the coach. It's not that often I get to speak to someone who played at service academies. I've always been interested. I was wondering if I could ask a question or two about in regards to Army football, not necessarily about this team, but just in general.
Sure. I will say this. Maybe you don't want to touch on the Wake Forest game, but man alive, a lot of scoring in that game yesterday.
Yeah, I wonder when the last time Army scored 56 and or the last time they gave up 70.
Well, I know the answer to the last time they gave up 70. It was when I was, I believe, a plebe even. Yeah, I'm sure of it. It was 1969. I'll tell you why I remember it. Because the team that put 77 on us that year was the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And, of course, Nebraska was really, really good at that point in time. And, obviously, we were not very good. And they beat us 77-7, as I recall, in the fall of 69. I believe it might have been game 1. But the good news.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We still did have winning seasons 3 out of 4 years. We beat Navy 3 out of 4 years, too. So we did have pretty good teams despite that humiliation against Nebraska.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. I would have thought this was the first time they ever gave it up. I was surprised that, especially in that era when scoring was a lot less. But that's one of the reasons I call.
Appreciate it, Jakob.
Actually, Coach, the other thing I want to ask you about, Coach, is that obviously the Army-Navy game is always such a great tradition. I've been watching it without fail for I'm going to say at least 35 years, probably sometime in the mid 80s or so. I've never missed a game, never attended a game. I'd like to, but always watch it on TV. I was wondering though. Now this year I happened to watch it because it was on 9/11. I watched the Navy Air Force. I think the Air Force played at Navy, but I was wondering why. Do you know why it is that we don't really hear that much about, say, Navy Air Force or Army Air Force? It doesn't really get much publicity. And I was at the same time I was also wondering when you were in Army, did you guys get up for it? Was it as meaningful to play Air Force, despite the fact that it wasn't the last game of the year? Was it as meaningful for you guys to play them as it was to play Navy?
I think Army Navy, of course, just covers so many more years than either one of those games involving Air Force, whether it be Army or Navy. The games with Air Force are big games. Don't get me wrong. There's a thing called a Commander-in-Chief's Trophy that goes to the team with the best record among all three. We're talking about all three head-to-head. And, of course, if there is a tie, if everyone beats everyone, then the team that had it the previous year gets to keep the trophy. But it is a big deal to go 2-0 versus the other two schools. And it's really the sign of accomplishment. Of course, it's nice to have a winning season and be part of a bowl game. But let's face it, now you got 35 bowl games, so it's not that hard to be bowl eligible. What's more significant, I think, in the eyes of the cadets is retaining or earning the Commander-in-Chief trophy. That is a big deal. And Army-Navy is a huge spectacle. I would strongly recommend you need to see one of those sometime in your lifetime because it really will make you proud to be an American, to see when you see the entire Corps of Cadets on the field at one time. You know, that's 4,000 plus cadets, 4,000 plus midshipmen. And I'll let you know now, we're the ones that are easy to identify because we're the ones that actually have better drill and ceremony. We actually know how to march and stay in step, and the Naval Academy is not quite so good at it.
Well, I guess when you're walking around boats, it's hard to march that way. Well, Coach, yeah, I'm very happy to call. This is one of the things I was, again, there was great information there, great history, and yeah, that is definitely on my bucket list. Attending an Army Navy game is top my not just sports bucket list, but bucket list in life. And I guess the last thing I want to ask you, Coach, is I guess the last thing I'll do. I know you guys want to talk about other things and speak about Iowa football, but now someone who had a recruit when you were there or these days, who's thinking about playing, say, Army football, I would think it's obviously a certain profile of students academically and otherwise. Is it common that Army, Navy, and Air Force are recruiting the same players or same students, and someone comes down to choosing between one of those three academies, and I was wondering if at the same time if that's something that you had to do when you were considering colleges.
Well, the school I wanted to play for was the University of Texas, but I wasn't good enough to be offered a scholarship at Texas. I think you have to realize one of the things that weighs on any cadet or midshipman's minds, there's a service obligation after your graduation. And I think it's certainly a fair trade to be able to get 4 years of outstanding education, to get a degree that actually has a lot of meaning, and then to be able to fulfill that commitment to our government is a fair trade, because as you know, a college education costs so much money nowadays. And I did find this out when I decided to leave the Army. It really was true that you really have your choice among all kinds of job opportunities. And I was so crazy that I ended up being a football coach rather than making more money elsewhere, I think is safe to say. Back in those days, coaches weren't paid like they are today. So literally anybody that's coached back in time, they didn't do it for the money. They did it because they simply have a love for the game, and they like to think that they can make a difference in lives of young people and help young men to become men. That's really where it all starts for any college football coach.
Wow, yeah. Well, Coach, this was great. I really appreciate you guys, both of you guys taking the time to go slightly off the topic of Iowa, but this is great information, and we enjoyed hearing about your about the Army and about your time in the Army and the Army football, and appreciate it. I'm going to listen to the rest of the show.
Appreciate it, Jakob22. Always enjoy the calls. And I do want to address something. We do have another call here waiting, but I do want to address something before we take this next call, and that is a question, or not a question, but, well, I guess it is a question. Patrick O'Connell says, how do you know he cannot slide? He's talking about Spencer Petras. He's scrambled for positive yards about twice in his career. Well, I guess I don't know that, Don, but we have seen, and again, as I brought out earlier, Spencer's not the only guy. When they do scramble or run, they're taking hits. And C.J. Beathard got beat to heck when he was at Iowa because he couldn't slide. So, Don, I know maybe we can't be dogmatic about this, but the few times Spencer has ran, he has not utilized a slide.
Well, I'm trying to think back. I believe it was the Purdue game. Weren't there two cases in that game where he did cross the line of scrimmage, worked his way downfield, did not slide, and actually looked awkward in the way that the play finished up? There was, matter of fact, I know one time he got up and he was kind of limping around a little bit because he was in an awkward position when the play was blown dead. And until he proves he can slide, I'm going to continue to assume that he cannot because I haven't seen it.
I like that, Don. Bob Burke says, I wonder if Iowa's analytics say sliding is overrated and to go head first and get down. And I think he's being serious here, Don. They are one of the few teams over the years who have not utilized it. I don't believe that's the case, Don. And if anybody's going to know what Iowa's analytics say about sliding, it's Don Patterson. So, Don, have you broken down the analytics about sliding? I doubt that it's better to go head first, ever.
Well, I always used to define it by down and distance. And our quarterbacks certainly understood if it's first or second down, protect yourself, get all the yardage you can. But ultimately, more than anything else, protect yourself. If you can get out of bounds without taking a hit, do that. And if you are on the field of play and you cannot get off the field, go ahead and slide before you get hit. And then the other qualifier is if it's third or fourth down, you just became a running back. So at that point, I don't want you to slide. I want you to know for sure where that first down marker is. If it's going to be close, then you have no choice but to get your pads down and lead with shoulder pads, and understand that every inch matters because it is critical that you get that first down on a critical down. So that's the real difference there. Go ahead and take a chance. But you're still, again, the key point is to have your pads down, never, ever get stood up. That's how you see a lot of fumbles come out. A player gets stood up, and now the next man in strips the ball out. Incidentally, talk about a controversial play. Did you see the Oklahoma play over the weekend?
Oh, are you talking Oklahoma or Oklahoma State?
No, it was Oklahoma, I believe. I know it was Oklahoma.
The strip by the quarterback.
The back got stopped. You could certainly argue that his forward progress was stopped. And then the quarterback managed to take the ball from him and go for a first down.
What a play. What a play.
All I can say is, well, the quarterback hadn't heard a whistle, so he thought maybe the back needed a little relief. And it worked.
Absolutely did. We do have a call I want to get to. Has been waiting patiently. Thank you for calling Iowa at the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hi, gentlemen. This is Ben. How are you guys
Ben.
doing this evening?
We're good. I think I can speak for Don in saying we've both had an enjoyable weekend and looking forward to game week.
Oh, me too. Me too. Have you? I didn't catch the beginning of your show. I was like 44 minutes in before I even realized it was on. Did you guys make predictions for the Iowa-Wisconsin game this week?
Certainly not. Certainly not. I won't come out with my predictions until Friday evening on my channel. And maybe
Okay.
Don will throw us a bone here later in the show, but we have not gotten that far.
I need to run the analytics first. I'm not going to make any predictions until I have a better idea of what's happened so far.
Yeah, and I missed the Purdue-Wisconsin game. I didn't get a chance. I recorded all. I was gonna rewatch it, and kind of before the Wisconsin Purdue game, my thought on this matchup was Iowa. I mean, I'm still confident Iowa is gonna come out with the win here. I think my biggest, the thing that I look at with Iowa, that I think is the most iffy is Iowa has to play a very disciplined game, and I think if they lose discipline, that's where Iowa. That's where I would, you're right. These are young kids, and it's staying disciplined week after week. It's not, there's a lot of football to play, and to be perfect or near perfect, it's hard to do.
There's a reason why, and Don's obviously being in the analytics genius that he is as it relates to Big Ten football, has said time after time the biggest indicator of winning is turnover margin, right, Don? Or
Yes.
With some exceptions, of course, Illinois has been one of those weird anomalies.
They've been a thorn in my side because they're hurting the analytics of turnover margin.
But we saw these last 2 weeks, Ben. We saw again Iowa struggle against Purdue, taking care of the ball. Purdue turned the ball over one time, didn't make a difference in the long run, but it was a turnover. And then, of course, Purdue turned the ball over way too much against Wisconsin. So I think you're absolutely right. The one difference with why I have more confidence this year than in past Iowa-Wisconsin games is because although Wisconsin can run the ball very effectively, they have a quarterback who has not shown to me that he can even manage a game very well because he is so prone to turnovers.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think with this matchup, I look at how Iowa's played, not counting the Purdue game, but Iowa's past the prior 6 games. And I think if they play like that, it's that Wisconsin's, especially their quarterback's, going to have a rough time. I would expect to see some turnovers. I don't see I don't see him rising above what he has been playing Iowa.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's why I'm looking at Iowa for win. I know a lot of fans were really upset about the Purdue game as far as Iowa, but I still see Iowa being the top contender for the West.
Sure hope
I
you're
want
right.
to say this, talking about turnover margin. I've done analytics on the Big Ten for the last 6 years, and I'd be willing to bet if you look at +3 turnover margin over the last 6 years, it would certainly be 90% plus win. If you're +3, you're going to win bare minimum 9 out of 10. It might be as high as 95% even, but I'm confident in saying it would be in the 90s.
Well, that's interesting. That's yeah. Well, that I hope that holds true, because I'm a Michigan fan and our turnover margin's been great this year, and I would love more than anything to be playing Iowa in the Big Ten championship this year.
Well, it would be healthy for Big Ten football for somebody to represent Indianapolis that hadn't been there lately.
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, and this year's been a great year for football, for college football already, and can't complain about it if it doesn't happen. But man, sure would love to see it. I've been rooting for Iowa every week, and I'll be doing that until hopefully we meet up in the Big Ten championship game, and then we'll have different conversations.
We will look forward to it. Let's hope it happens.
Yeah, it was nice talking with you, gentlemen, and I'll let somebody else get on the phone now. You guys have a good one.
Take care, Ben. All right. So a comment here from Bora Rim. Shouldn't Ken O'Keefe be the offensive coordinator then? Does having the QB coach not being the OC hurt? Now, what does SP stand for? Am I missing something here, Don?
I don't know what SP might be.
But that is a question that I brought up to you, Don. Typically, you see offensive coordinators also coach quarterbacks. I thought it was interesting that, of course, Brian doesn't have experience really coaching a whole lot. I mean, let's just be honest. I'm not trying to knock Brian, but he doesn't have a lot of experience. He's an offensive coordinator with not a whole lot of experience coaching different positions on the offense, as opposed to someone. I just make the comparison. You, as a veteran retired coach, Don, have you coached every position group?
I haven't coached offensive line, haven't coached O-line, but I've coached the others.
So, I mean, I'm not asking you to comment on, should Iowa make coaching staff changes, but is there a trend with collegiate jobs where you primarily see the offensive coordinator also coach quarterbacks?
Well, I think it was done that way probably more 10 or 20 years ago than it is today. Back then, I think the offensive coordinator in the vast majority of the cases was the quarterback coach, or maybe even the quarterback receiver coach. Give you an example, Bill Snyder was the quarterback receiver coach at the same time he was the offensive coordinator at Iowa back in the 80s. And then for most of the 90s, I was the quarterback receiver coach and the offensive coordinator too. There were a couple of years in there in between where Carl Jackson was the offensive coordinator. That's when I'd been promoted into Bill Snyder's old position. Carl had 10 years experience on me, and Carl had the coordinator title. But to be honest with you, it was a collaborative effort on both our parts. And, we simply worked together to finalize that plan for our offense. And of course, who we kidding, Hayden Fry was right in the middle of it too, because Coach Fry always was an offensive mind and a great mind too. So it was a collaborative effort. I don't think there's anything wrong with the quarterback coach not being the offensive coordinator. At that point, you have to recognize he must be in that position because he's recognized as, if you will, a quarterback guru, a guy that really knows how to train quarterbacks. And of course, he still works hand in hand with the OC. He does have a lot of input in terms of play calling, certainly on any staff. So I think what people fail to realize is, even though the OC is the play caller, he is continually getting input from the other coaches throughout the course of the game. That's the way the typical offensive structure would be. It's a collaborative effort to decide what plays go on the field. It's not strictly the responsibility of the OC.
Bob Burke does make the comment. I think he's right. This is just stating a fact. Ken is the highest. He and that quarterback coach from Nebraska make over $500,000 a year as quarterback coaches. So, and I do believe that's correct. I do believe I looked that up not that long ago and found those numbers to be true. He also says, I don't think the offensive line is up to par for Iowa yet. Absolutely right there. This is an interesting comment because I grew up in Marshalltown, Don. Did Hayden Fry go to Rube's in Montour very often, and is it still open? So I'm a Marshalltown native. Rube's Steakhouse was sort of iconic in our area. Kind of Montour, if you know where it's basically halfway in between Tama, Toledo, and Marshalltown along Highway 30, just to the south. I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that Blake knows Rubes and why he would think Hayden. Maybe Hayden did go there a lot. I don't know. Do you have any? Have you ever heard of Rubes, Don?
I can honestly say I've never heard of Rubes, nor have I heard Hayden Fry ever mention Rubes.
Have you heard of Montour?
Haven't heard of Montour either. But I suspect that maybe Blake might have some photographic proof that Hayden was there at one time. Maybe, I don't know.
So Montour, according to the 2020 census, has a population of 203. I will say this, if I recall, and I could be wrong on this, my senior photos in high school, Don, were taken by a really nice guy that had an operation in Montour, who also happens to be a big Hawkeye fan, who, last I knew, was battling cancer. So Montour is a kind of a well-known town for our family, and Rubes was great. I don't know if Rubes is still open, but man, they were popular, kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, here. CK16 says, my dad always had quoted, he would say after losing games as a kid, you got to learn to lose before you can learn to win. Always would take more lessons out of a loss through the years than winning. Is there something to that, Don?
Yeah, there's a little bit of truth to that. There absolutely is. I think especially when you have a chance to reflect with an off week on what just happened, probably puts things back in perspective, gives you a better mindset maybe to go into that next game. I do think you're going to see a sense of urgency out of us. I even openly questioned, is it possible some guys had an inflated opinion of how they were going to be able to play from one week to the next? So it was a wake-up call to lose to Purdue. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. The only thing that's critical is to be sure the loss only counts as one. You have to learn from it. I don't doubt that we've learned from it. And we're going to show up, I think, at Wisconsin with a great effort to get back on track. We do have that mindset now that our backs are against the wall. We know the only safe way to represent the West is to win out. That's the only, that's 100% reliable. If we win out, we're in. It's that simple. Difficult to go 5-0. This is our second season. All we can do is go 1-0 next weekend, and then we'll worry about the next one as it comes up, but not until after the Wisconsin game is put to bed.
Appreciate this from Richard. Says he'd call, but wanted to say hi and go Hawks. Do you think we can win the Big Ten or Big Ten West and high Don? So,
am I supposed to know Richard? I'm not sure.
Well, we know Richard has been a faithful follower of our show. I know. I think you would probably say that Iowa does have a good chance of winning the West. I mean, obviously, so does Wisconsin, so does Minnesota, and you could probably throw Purdue in the mix still.
You know what would really be interesting right now, and of course Vegas has odds on everything. I wonder what the odds are right now in the Big Ten West. My guess is you could probably research that and find out what it is, and I would suspect it's pretty even for all three.
I would agree. Certainly Purdue took a bit of a hit yesterday, and Wisconsin. I think Iowa and Minnesota are the two favorites right now, right? Probably.
We both have one loss, and in that regard, we've got a little more margin for error because it's entirely possible that the representative is 7-2.
Absolutely. Blake Jameson says, can Iowa State win the Big 12? I think they certainly can, and that helps Iowa. If you're an Iowa fan, you ought to be rooting for Iowa State. I know that's not always easy for Iowa fans.
Well, that's one score I did notice even while up in South Dakota. It was amazing to me because the KU Oklahoma game started earlier than ours. And, of course, at half it was 10-0 KU, I believe. And I think OU had less than 100 yards of offense.
And there was an egregious holding call missed in that game that went against Kansas. They might have won that game. And the AP voters, although I don't normally agree with the AP voters punished Oklahoma for that showing. Ohio State or was it Ohio State that jumped him? I looked at the poll and I did notice that Oklahoma went down despite winning, which you don't see very often from the AP poll.
Well, you heard me say a few weeks ago, Cory, I thought OU was very vulnerable, and I still think they are. They dodged a huge bullet to get by Texas. I do believe that they play Iowa State in Ames. Is that right or not? I'm not sure.
That I'd have to look up. I don't
the
have
good news. If you're an Iowa State fan, it doesn't matter because Iowa State's beating them in Norman anyway.
Yeah.
So I do like Iowa State's chances, and
I do too.
Iowa State's in the same spot that Iowa is. They just got to be sure to focus on the next opponent and take them one at a time. And I don't doubt that Matt Campbell's going to have his guys doing that, and I don't doubt that Kirk's not going to be able to get the same thing accomplished on our end.
Hawkeye Howard wants Chuck Long here. Joseph Walters wants Bob Stoops here. Let's see here. Bob Burke. Is an Iowa's offensive line play the key to competing in Madison on Saturday? If they have not improved over the bye week, that game Saturday will be hard to win. Again, there's a ceiling on this. I mean, Don let's just be honest. There is a ceiling on how much this offensive line can improve. Technique can improve, like Don's talked about, but there are some plays where these guys are just getting bullied, especially against Purdue. You watch that tape back. There were plays where each tackle and even Kyler Schott, I noticed a play or two where he's getting pushed back into the pocket. You know, again, technique can solve some of that, but some of that's strength, right, Don?
Yes, and you're right. I think back to the Penn State game. I remember being surprised, to be honest with you, without calling anybody out on any particular play. In general, everybody but our center, our guards, and our tackles at one time or another were what you might call manhandled almost in that game. Now, I realize Penn State's way above average at those positions, but we had difficulty at both guard positions and both tackle positions from time to time, being able to effectively pass block against Penn State. And I think Wisconsin's going to present some of those same kind of problems. But we'll have to see what happens Saturday. And the great insurance that we might be able to earn would be insurance related to turnover margin. Obviously, if you're +3 or +4 on turnovers, that solves a lot of your problems.
Real quickly, Don, question from Ray.
Okay, I'll be able to answer that. I was in field artillery. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. I was, if you're a second lieutenant in field artillery, you're a forward observer, which was good because it requires being able to compute numbers in your head from time to time. You got to adjust artillery fire. And I was good at that because it was an exercise in numbers. And then beyond that, the next job for a first lieutenant, typically in field artillery, is fire direction officer. And now you're adjusting the firing data for the field artillery for the howitzers that are used in a battery of a field artillery unit. And that's back in the days. We had a computer back then, but we didn't trust it really. So all the firing data was actually computed manually. And again, it was all about numbers, and that's my strength. So I think I was certainly above average as both the forward observer and a fire direction officer. A matter of fact, a funny story, we were having a demonstration against a bunch of visiting dignitaries at Fort Hood, Texas. And I worked up the firing data, which involves sending a weather balloon up at the site. You have to know what the winds are aloft, and you have to come up with the original firing data. And when you know it, and a battery is usually 6 howitzers, so you typically adjust fire with only the 2 middle howitzers. And the first 2 shots go out at our target downrange. And of course, the generals are watching this. And when you know it, one of those rounds was actually a target hit on the target. If you can think about this, that target maybe was a bare minimum of probably 15 kilometers from the howitzer, so maybe 10 miles away. The other target hit at a range of 10 miles or slim and none, of course. And matter of fact, there was a general that suspected that it was simply staged, that we had explosives in the tank that was out in the battlefield. And he didn't want to believe that somebody was lucky enough to get a target hit. He wanted to meet the lieutenant that happened to compute that firing data. And I assured him that it was legit. And the battery commander had already assured him of that. But he said, I want to meet that young lieutenant anyway, because he must have a good idea of how to compute firing data. And the beauty of it, when you have the target hit, of course, you simply fire for effect. So it was a very short demonstration of artillery fire because it was 2 rounds to adjust with, and then it was fire for effect all rounds that followed from all 6 howitzers. And it was an impressive demonstration because we were able to be on target almost immediately. And of course, the next round of artillery fire came in shortly thereafter. So that's my high moment as a fire direction officer. But I enjoyed my service time, and I think it certainly gave me a good preparation for working with young people. Because let's face it, if you're a lieutenant in the Army, you're working with a bunch of soldiers that are, in many cases, still teenagers, or if they're not teenagers, they're in their early 20s. And when you know it, football players are in that same age bracket. So it was good preparation for college football, I think. Being able to motivate, to be honest with you, motivating a bunch of football players at Iowa was an easier assignment than motivating a bunch of troops that are in the Army.
And Bob says you would have been one scary dude. So, no, lots of kind comments from our listeners this evening towards you, Don. Nick's back to Iowa here. Nick says Spencer throws it away way before he ever has a chance to slide. Well, there's something to be said for that as well, Don. That's a valid point, but I think both are valid points. He doesn't appear to know how to slide, and he doesn't appear to know always when to extend the play with his legs.
Well, if you bail out of the back of the pocket, which is something that happens with Spencer a fair amount, and again, it's not all his fault. Sometimes, of course, there's a real push on the pocket in terms of pass rushers. But when you bail out of the back of the pocket, if you're not very mobile anyway, then logically it's hard for you to ever get turned downhill, which makes it harder to throw the ball downfield. And your alternative, of course, is simply to loft the ball off the field because you're running toward the boundary more so than down the field anyway. So many good runners as quarterbacks, when they pull the ball down and run, they're often simply running the daylight up inside. They see a little bit of green up inside somewhere. They take it. And, of course, they're running north-south in terms of the field. And we say north-south. Football fields traditionally are laid out exactly north-south. I don't know if the fans are aware of that, but Kinnick is very typical. That is a true north-south field. And the vast majority of the playing fields in the Big Ten are north-south. And so when we say north-south, we're talking about running directly down the field. And when you do that, of course, you've got a good chance to gain yardage quickly because you're not running laterally, you're running down the field.
CK16 says, apparently you were talking about a type of a fumble. He says, just as you were talking about this type of fumble, the Colts forced a fumble just like you described. So there you go, Don. You're just on. You're just on tonight, Don. So
talking about ripping a ball out when a player gets stood up.
I would assume so. Andy here says he'd like to hear Don comment on why or how it is that any team seems to be able to win on any given Saturday. We've seen that this year more probably than any other year, at least in my memory.
Yeah, I think really if you want to boil down to the reason behind it, I think we do have more parity now maybe than any time ever before. And if I had to give you one reason, I would simply say the transfer portal. The backup quarterbacks in so many cases have decided to go somewhere else, and they've been good enough to start at the next school. And it's not just backup quarterbacks, it's also backup running backs in particular. That have made that same move. And in many cases, look at prime example, the guy at Michigan State. Kind of hard to imagine that Wake Forest didn't have big plans for him. And Wake Forest does have a good back, but my gosh, the guy at Michigan State, he might be first team all Big Ten. And I think they've slowed him down here a little bit better in recent weeks. He's still putting up big numbers. Last time I checked, he was leading all of Division I football in rushing yardage per game. Now, maybe he's not based on Saturday. Come to think of it, they didn't even play this week, did they? Michigan State didn't play. I think they had an open date. Yeah, he may still be the nation's leading rusher right now, and yet he was, I guess, the backup at Wake Forest. I don't know why else he left because Wake Forest has a good back, I know, because they just put 70 on Army. I think the back had something to do with it. But truthfully, you got a lot of good players that are no longer comfortable being second team. It seems kind of crazy to me. I know Jerry DiNardo on the Big Ten Network commented. He said, you better know for sure a lot about your number 3 quarterback because that's going to be the next guy in because number 2 is going to leave. And there's a lot of truth to that. I think it's unfortunate with the transfer portal because part of the educational process is learning how to deal with adversity and learning how to be second and learning how to be ready ready for action even if you are second. I'll give you a prime example. Chuck Long was a runner-up for the Heisman in 1985. And I remember after the season, a Big Ten coach said, well, we're going to get you next year because Chuck Long's going to be gone. And I said, well, here's what you're not aware of. We have a guy named Mark Vlasic, and he's a better passer than Chuck Long. And Mark Vlasic was leading Division I football in pass efficiency when he got injured about midseason that next year. It's unfortunate that he was injured because he missed a few weeks, as I recall. But the rest of the story, I would suspect that Mark Vlasic threw for more yards in the NFL than Chuck did. I don't know that for a fact, but Mark went on to have a good career. So did Chuck, but truthfully, I think Mark probably had more passing yardage. That'd be a good research project for somebody that wants to take it on.
Apparently, you made a subtle dig at Michigan. I didn't catch that, Don. People giving you credit for things that are going over our head, and a couple of our listeners. SP stands for Spencer Petras, so appreciate that. I guess we should have figured that out. Bob Burke says he got lost in Marshalltown back in 2010 and thought he was taking a trip back to 1995. Thank you very much.
Feels like Bob spent a week there one night.
Yeah. Marshalltown, I will say this about Marshalltown. It got hit hard by that tornado here 3 years ago, Don. And I was there the other day, and they're still repairing the courthouse. I mean, the courthouse just got ripped. I mean, just leveled on the top section of the courthouse was just gone, and they're still working. So I feel bad for my hometown. I mean, I'm not it's not like I can't take shots at Marshalltown, but they have dealt with a lot. The derecho and the tornado in 3 years is a lot. Ray says that Rubes opens at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. So I'm glad somebody else knows Rubes.
That only opens one day a week then, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me look that up, Don, here, because, like I said, it's been so long. Let's see, Rubes.
While you're working on that, Cory, I want to mention, I know you're going to mention it at the end of the show anyway, but I'll mention it now too. Somebody made a reference to enjoying a conversation on Sunday night, and this is a good time to remind the listeners we're going to do this again next Sunday night, also at 7 o'clock. Is that right, Cory?
Yes, sir. You got it. Yep, 7 p.m. Well, I mean, I'll be on after the Wisconsin game for an immediate reaction to the game, but then Don will join us the day after because, Don, you're going to be at Western Illinois' game on Saturday.
Yes, we've been back to a Western Illinois game each and every year, and I don't want to ever fail to make contact on a yearly basis. We want to support those guys that are playing there now, even though they didn't play for us, and that's just my way of being loyal to Western Illinois. So we look forward to reconnecting with a bunch of friends this weekend. It'll be Illinois State at Western, and the irony there is that Brock Spack, the coach at Illinois State, was the first guy we recruited when we came to Iowa, and he had the audacity to go to Purdue instead of Iowa. But he's a dear friend, and I'll be conflicted on Saturday because I want Western Illinois to win the game for many reasons. But if Illinois State does win it, I'll be happy for Brock because he's a dear friend too.
All right, I'm going to do something here that I'll never do again because this is free advertising. And by the way, if anybody knows a small business in the area that wants to advertise, or even not a local business, we got listeners everywhere, you're welcome to advertise with us. But just for the record, this is the only time I'm going to do this because we've had this conversation. Rube's Steakhouse, 118 East Elm in Montour. They are open every day of the week but Monday. So they are closed now. They close at 8. And I didn't realize this, Don. Apparently they've opened one in Waukee. I was not aware of this. So it appears to be the same restaurant, Rube's Steakhouse. That's how famous they were in Montour. So apparently they're doing business in both towns now.
Is Rube still with us, or is his name just last?
I don't think so. I really don't know the history. Well, according to this, it says Rube's Steakhouse is the original grill your own steakhouse since 1973. So I don't know. I don't know who Rube was. And again, we didn't go there very much, but I know it was popular. It was extremely popular. So, these small towns, Ann Hopper says, good food, steaks, Rube's still open in Montour. There you go. There you go. So,
you might run into Ann if you show up there.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Let's see here. Final call on calls. We've kept Don longer than I intended to keep you here this evening, Don, and I sure appreciate it. I know everybody else does as well. So if anybody else wants to call now or forever hold your peace. Hawkeye Howard, he says Rubes is still open. So people are quick to their phones this evening. They're helpful, and we appreciate that too. Compliment here to you as well, Don. Nick Things says, I'm not sure what the reference here is. He says, you are not senile at all.
Well, I think the analytics does help, because I'm certainly trying to stay busy, and I appreciate that. I think my mind is just as sharp now as it was a few years ago.
I would say so. Absolutely. Joseph Walters mentions an injury to Kyler Schott. I didn't catch that in the game. Hope that's not true because, man, they need him healthy, just like they need the rest of that offensive line to stay healthy and be able to develop. Because, again, you miss time in practice, Don. That can't help you on game day. Even if you are able to play Saturday, if you miss Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, boy, that's a big chunk of development, especially for a young guy.
Yeah, that's why the bye is so critical in midseason or so. And it'll be interesting to see if it happens this weekend the way it happened the previous weekend. And that would simply be a team like Purdue that had a bye week before they played Iowa. It seemed to help Purdue. And obviously now the advantage would fall to us if we're able to take full advantage of it. The fact that Wisconsin only had a week to prepare for Iowa, whereas we had 2 weeks to prepare for the Badgers.
Ray says that he was infantry, so he appreciates hearing your story, Don. Charles brings up an interesting comment. He says if Iowa can rush for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns this weekend, he likes Iowa to win. Remember, though, if I'm correct in saying this, Don, it's more about winning the rushing battle as opposed to a certain number you want to hit. So if Wisconsin runs for 200, it doesn't look good.
Absolutely true. That's why I like to couch it always in terms of team situations. In other words, can you outrush the opponent? You're exactly right, Cory. If we rush for 120 and they rush for 240, then we still have a huge problem, specifically in the rushing game.
Absolutely. Eric asks, how big of a role did the lack of QB pressures play in the Purdue loss? I heard there were almost no pressures as a result of upping the pass protection. No wonder the QB had plenty of time to find Bell. The blitzes were not effective in that game, Don. And
of course, you remember one particular pressure that really cost us dearly, and that was the 60 play to number 3.
Let's get this Rubes advertisement off of our screen here. Okay. Yes, protection needs to be a lot better. And I hope it will. Again, every week, especially with the bye week, you give that extra week, even if it is just technique, that can go a long way. And again, you hope Spencer continues to be able to make better decisions, and he's being coached well in practice. Event Tide says, who do you think has the most of a downhill runner style as far as running backs go for Iowa? I would say Gavin Williams. They don't really have that as far as a top 2. Ivory Kelly Martin's very similar to Tyler Goodson, at least it's how they run. They're both hard to take down. They both got speed. Gavin's more of that thunder to their lightning, I guess, Don. But are you surprised we haven't seen more? We've seen Iowa play 3 backs in past seasons. Are you surprised we haven't seen one of the Williams emerge?
Only mildly surprised. Honestly, I would suggest to you that Kelly Martin is more of a downhill runner.
Okay.
He's actually probably the more what's the right word? The more deliberate runner, you could argue, would be Tyler. Tyler tries to pick his way and then accelerate through a hole when he sees a hole, and that's had good effect. But just as far as getting your pads down and not really being as deliberate a runner, you might argue that Kelly Martin actually has an edge on Tyler in that regard. He's got a pretty good average to show for it. I don't know how the averages compare, but there have been games, correct me if I'm wrong, Cory, where Kelly Martin had a better average than Tyler did.
That's true. And certainly the difference, at least from my perspective, is ball security. We saw, I believe Ivory Kelly Martin fumbled Saturday, didn't he? And he got called back, correct? Or they said he was down by contact?
I think that's right, yeah.
So those issues are not gone. I mean, I know the coaches are putting trust in him, but man, you can't afford fumbles in big spots in the game. And certainly Ivory Kelly Martin's had that issue. Hasn't come back to bite Iowa yet, but don't want to take that risk. John says, given the highly rated young recruits we got last year, how does their development look? Mostly those we don't get to see. Also interested in Hogan's development, if you're willing. Well, I don't have any insight as far as what we're seeing during fall practice. You know, we get a glimpse into the spring. We get a glimpse into fall at Kids Day. Obviously, Connor Colby has developed well. Other than that, true freshmen Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce have come on strong, Don. But it's guys that we haven't seen during games. Do we really know? Do you have any insight on some of these young guys from this past recruiting class?
Well, that brings up a good point. I mentioned that with the extra week, the off week, that you could spend more time on technique than you would in any particular game week. Another benefit wouldn't surprise me at all, that off week, if Spencer got fewer reps in practice and number 2 and number 3 got more reps. So Hogan probably did have a better chance to show his recent development in that off week than he would get in a normal week. That's just part of getting him better prepared to play. And of course, Padilla needs all the snaps he can get too. If you're not going to be able to get them on Saturday, then obviously if you get more of them in the practice week, then that has benefit too. You're not working against Wisconsin, but you're working against a team that is mimicking Wisconsin. And in that regard, it's good preparation for the game itself.
Can you hear me, Don?
I just got you back.
I apologize for that. Wanted to run through 2 more comments, and then we're going to head out. Again, we appreciate the time from Don. Appreciate the viewership here this evening. Kyle makes a comment about Wisconsin finding their groove, but of course, Mertz only threw 8 passes for 52 yards. Does Coach Phil Parker load the box and make Mertz beat them? I would think that would be the plan for everybody, but obviously it didn't work for Purdue. Don, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's a good way to start. And as we've discussed before, Wisconsin would prefer to run the ball 50 times. They ran it 51 times against Purdue. So again, let's force them to play left-handed. Let's not allow them to beat us the way they're most comfortable doing it. And that would be to pound the ball up and down the field. So I think that's a good plan. You know, if we have to load the box to slow down the running game, let's do it. Let's take our chances outside. You know, maybe initially, put it this way, if we start the game early on by loading the box and attacking the running game, if we don't hold up well with a lot of single coverage, then we can always adjust. But at least we're giving it a chance to work. And in the process of giving it a chance to work, of course, you're making them play differently than what they'd like to play. Can we hold up well enough? That's a roll of the dice. We don't know. But obviously, at least I'd rather go that route than go the route of just letting them play like they want to play. And we know that they're pretty good at that because that's what they get by with doing a lot of the time.
Joseph Walters recommends some blitzing. Obviously, it's got to be well-timed. Phil is very selective with blitzing. Corning Cattle, good to see you here this evening. You're catching us towards the tail end of our show. And how about this comment to finish things off this evening, Don? Give the ball to Pottebaum more. We've heard a lot of love towards the Iowa fullback, and he has been effective when running the football. I do believe that this is just my naive perspective. When I watch Pottebaum run, he doesn't really, at least that I've seen, he doesn't run with his shoulder pads down, and that concerns me because he's a 6'1" guy, and I'm afraid even though he's a big physical guy, at some point he's going to get stood up.
Well, I hope not. The beauty of giving the ball to your upback, to your fullback in an eye, is obviously you don't have to maintain the blocks as long because he clears the line of scrimmage quicker. And there is an element of surprise there, and I think that's one reason. I'd be curious. I bet if you go back and chart, typically when we give them the ball, it is a critical down. We usually need 1 or 2, maybe 3 even, but I think in almost every case we've gotten the yardage that we need. I think it's been pretty effective for us to give the ball to our fullback. And let's not forget we have a play off that called belly pitch too. You remember that? We faked a dive into the line and then pitched the ball outside of the contained rusher for a touchdown. So there are other companion plays that go with that complement giving the ball to the fullback. And as long as Pottebaum keeps getting the necessary yardage, I'd be inclined to keep giving him part of those carries because so far so good. He's been effective with it, and we're converting, and that's really all that matters.
Charles reminds us each and every week, Don the GOAT. So always
Charles, I appreciate that. I really do.
Not that we need the reminders. We're already well aware of that. Couple housekeeping things before we move on, or say goodnight, actually. Again, actually, let me add to this because at the time, maybe we did know, but I want to make sure everybody's aware of how to watch the game this coming Saturday. Obviously, it's an 11 a.m. Central Time game on ESPN. So Iowa, Wisconsin, October 30th is coming Saturday, 11 a.m. Central Time. And then, of course, we will be here, Iowa post game at the Voice of College Football, following what we hope to be an Iowa victory. But even if it's not, we'll be here talking about the Iowa-Wisconsin game immediately following the game. I will be here. We'll be taking your calls here at the Voice of College Football, Iowa football at the Voice of College Football. And then, of course, let me throw this back up here again. Don will be back with us. And I'm going to make sure everybody's aware. This is Sunday. There was some confusion on our part about how many days there are in October last time, Don.
Pretty sure there's still 31, huh?
There's 31 days. So we'll be live with Don Patterson next Sunday, the 31st of October at 7 p.m. right here, Iowa football at the Voice of College Football. So again, I will be with you after the Iowa game, after the Iowa-Wisconsin game Saturday, and then I'll also be back with you and with Don Patterson Sunday evening at 7 p.m. We'll be taking your calls both Saturday and Sunday. And I want to throw this out again as well. I know I've been pushing this. I still want to get a feel, and we've gotten some response back, but would really like to get more response before we start a new project. If you would like an Iowa basketball live post-game show following Iowa Hawkeye games this fall and winter, please let us know. Let us know in the live chat. Comment on a video. You can send us an email. You can message us through Facebook. However you want to go about this, please give us some feedback. If you would be interested in listen to an Iowa Iowa basketball post-game show, please let us know. Because, again, it does take a lot of coordination and some work. So, again, we'd love to do this for all of our football and basketball enthusiasts, but we want to get a feeler out from everybody else. And, Don, I'm just seeing if there's anything here that I'm missing. This Tuesday, every Tuesday, myself and the voice of college football, Mark Rogers, will be live right here on the Iowa channel, Tuesdays at 4:30 p.m. Central Time, talking Iowa football. So please join us. Again, we'll be taking your chats, your comments, your questions every single Tuesday, 4:30 p.m. live. We had been kind of doing our show different times of the week. It is every Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. Central Time here at Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football. And again, if you want to donate, please take a look at not the comments, I keep saying comments section, the description below this video. And please, as you do this, make a note that it's for the Iowa channel. This is what we want. Charles giving us some feedback about Iowa basketball postgame. So please, again, keep that in mind as we head into a big, what I think to be a huge game this coming Saturday. And, of course, I will be over at From the Hawkeye of the Storm on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, as well as our podcast on Spotify, as you see on the bottom ticker, talking about this Wisconsin game in depth throughout the week. So lots of college football content, lots of Iowa content we're pumping out, Don, but we are so thankful we have you. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday evening, and enjoy the week ahead, and hopefully we get a win this next Saturday.
Thank you, Cory. One parting thought I mentioned to you, and I wouldn't mind you sharing with the listeners. You made the drive to Omaha a lot shorter on Friday afternoon because we were listening to your program with Mark as we drove across the state of Iowa. And I don't know exactly what the logistics are as far as being able to put that on the radio, but somehow my wife was able to get that done. I'm not sure how she did it.
Let me just say this, and I'm glad you brought that up, Don. And I'll make a banner here for our next show. But this has kind of been in the works, and there have been a lot of things going on trying to make sure everything gets put in place for each show each week. But we were given the green light to convert our shows with you, Don, into a podcast. So you'll be able to access all of our live shows with Don Patterson. You'll be able to access those shows through From the Hawkeye of the Storm on, again, Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon. So that will be done this week, but I don't, again, this takes a little bit of work and certainly time to get all of these post-game shows. We're gonna try to get all the post-game shows we've done this season with you, Don, onto our podcast platform. So From the Hawkeye of the Storm, and that makes it easier if you are in a car, if you're not in front of a computer, to where you can listen to our show. But again, we will be on Tuesday. Thank you for putting in that plug, Don, and we'll be back Tuesday, and we'll be back with you next weekend.
That sounds good, Cory. I look forward to it.
All right, for Don Patterson, I'm Cory Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm and Iowa football at the voice of college football. Have a great night.